The time has finally come. After trials and tribulations and hours of increasingly frustrating gameplay, the Xenologue has been completed. Not on maddening, unfortunately, which was something we're going to get into, and many of you should already be aware of by this point, but it's done, and my feelings are mixed. Overall positive, but mixed. So, we're going to talk about why I feel that way, what I think worked, and what I think maybe didn't work in this final wave of Fire Emblem Engage's DLC, the Xenologue. Let's talk about it. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you enjoy this video, any of my other content, or just what I do in general, if you could please subscribe and leave a like on this video, both of those would be very much appreciated. It helps me grow, and as a very small creator who's hoping to be a not so small creator by the end of the year, it would be very beneficial if you could help me out, and I'd very much appreciate it, so thank you. Now, the Xenologue. Boy, oh boy, the Xenologue. We've obviously talked about the Xenologue a few times now here on the channel. Most recently, I was talking about how Chapter 5 on Maddening absolutely broke me, and yeah, brought me around to the mindset that I just wanted to finish the damn DLC and had me wind up turning it down to normal just so we could finish it in my most recent stream. And I don't feel bad about that at all. I really don't. It's a shame that I felt compelled to do so by the design of Chapter 5 and the ever-increasing, not even difficulty, but frustration and aggravation that the last few maps of the Xenologue brought to the table on Maddening. But it is what it is. It's the way it was designed. So we're going to talk about that first, because it is pretty much the elephant in the room. It's the point of contention for most people, the difficulty and the design of the Xenologue. So right off the bat, I want to say, overall, I still like the idea of the Xenologue, and I like the way it was executed in terms of being more of a combat puzzle and less of a team-building exercise like the base game is. This is something that we saw with the Cindered Shadows DLC of Three Houses as well, wherein your team is not necessarily set in the same way it is in Cindered Shadows, where you specifically have like the exact units that they give you and no one else. Here, at least, you can bring in whoever you want from characters that you've recruited, but the fact that everyone is always at a set level with set gear that you just have, you can swap around, but you can't like buy new gear for anyone. Can't change anyone's classes, can't level anyone up, give them extra stats, anything like that. And the developers know exactly what it is you have available for the most part. And they say, here's the challenge, go figure it out. And I like that, because generally, the gameplay of Fire Emblem Engage is very, very good. The gameplay of Fire Emblem games in general is very, very good. So when the developers know what the sandbox you're going to be playing in is, they can design a much tighter, more cohesive experience. And I enjoy figuring that experience out. Now, you do have some customizability. We've talked before about how having a good build on a character is vital in the Xenologue, especially in Maddening. And it's clear that with Maddening in mind, they intended for you to do that level of challenge near the end of the game once you had a team of characters with good abilities set up, ready to go. And if you don't have that, it's going to be infinitely more difficult for you to make good progress through the Xenologue. And I think that's kind of reflected in the experience that I had with it. Because first, when I first started off the Xenologue, I was enjoying it. It was hard, yeah, but it was a challenge. It felt fair. Maps 1, 2, and 3, I enjoyed. Even if by the time we got to, Chapter 3, things were starting to get kind of grindy and kind of frustrating, but it was still interesting, and it was still fun, and I was still able to pull it off on my first attempt each time. Chapter 4 is where we started to hit a wall, and where I felt like my characters weren't up to snuff anymore. I had a couple of standout characters. My Rosado, even as a Wyvern Knight, is really strong. I've been using him as a Sword Master in my run, but he had good skills with Speed Taker, high bond level with Erica, and that carried him a lot. That allowed him to do a lot of work. Same thing for my Allchrist. Sniper Lyn Allchrist. Classic. Had a lot of skills that complemented that playstyle, and he did work. But I started to feel the fact that I didn't have many other characters that were up to that caliber. And I could start to feel that maybe I wasn't supposed to be doing Maddening at that point. where I was at in the story. Didn't have all the emblems available to me. That was a big one. Didn't have many good skills on a lot of characters. That was a big one. And then the characters that I did have good skills on, like Boucheron, were stuck because they had skills that were very much focused around them being a very different class than what they were. So not being able to be that class and use those abilities, in this case, Hero Boucheron with sword power, he's stuck as a berserker. He can't use swords unless he's engaged with someone who can use swords, which he could be, but not nearly as helpful as if he was just a hero at base. So, I still enjoyed that whole aspect, figuring out what I had available and making it work in that sandbox. The issue is when things began to feel more like it was just a war of attrition, a giant grind against the clock, hoping that you could finish your objectives before RNG decided that it was time to die. And those of you who followed my attempts at beating Chapter 5 on Maddening know that that's what eventually broke me. Getting to the very end of the map and it going, okay, well, here's extra things that are not impossible to get to, but extremely difficult to get to and stop, who are going to literally turn the mathematical odds against you, and there's very little that you can do about it, especially if you didn't know it was happening ahead of time. Like, knowing now what happens as you get near the end of the map and extra cannoneers spawning in to attack Allier and stuff like that, I can plan for that, and it'll be way easier to deal with. But going into it blind on your first time, it's brutal out, bordering on unfair, in a way that Maddening mode in the base game and in the first 3 chapters didn't feel to me. So that's a huge knock on the Xenologue. As much as it was fun figuring out the combat challenge, figuring out the puzzle with the characters that you have available, the emblems that you have available, as much as that was very fun on Maddening, it got untenable at the end. It'll be interesting to see if I ever decide to go back on a completed file or a nearly completed file with full builds, all the emblems, all that type of stuff, how my opinion changes in that regard, because that'll obviously be a big power boost. And with, you know, the power of hindsight, knowing how maps are going to play, that will help as well. So, but right off the bat, definitely soured me. Definitely soured me on the gameplay and the Xenologue a little bit as a whole. But that's gameplay. Let's move on. Next up, music, soundtrack. Bangers. Banger, 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 banger. Banger after banger. Like, dude, every single track in the Xenologue is straight fire. Four Winds theme, excellent. The various, like, corrupted nobles themes of the various countries, excellent. The tracks with vocals, was not expecting. I commented on it the very first day that I was playing the Xenologue, gave me a Nier vibe, which I absolutely adored. Even the 4Kids theme that we had during the end credits, better than the 4Kids theme in the base game. So, like, hey, pluses all around. Absolute huge props to the team that did the soundtrack, the OST, phenomenal in the Fell Xenologue, one of its biggest highlights. I'm not a music guy, so I can't, like, delve into the specifics of it, but just, I loved it. Absolutely one of my favorite parts of the Xenologue, A+. Designs. We're talking the designs and art of Nil and Nell, as well as the palette swaps and slight redesigns of the Winds in Madeline, Gregory, and Celestia. Really good. Really good. It's so interesting how the change away from making characters look obviously villainous to making them look more approachable and friendly, and the design changes that accompanied that just made the designs feel so much better. Like, I haven't compared them directly side by side, but like Marnie compared to Madeline, I'm pretty sure was just shifted to blue, but she already looks way better than the bright pink. It's so much more appealing. Gregory not looking quite as much like a BDSM addict and more just like a priest that is part of a group that has a slightly esoteric sense of dress, as you might expect from a group that worships Samran. Looks way better. Doesn't have all the weird tattoos / scarring and piercings and all that type of stuff. Like, not that there's anything wrong with that stuff, but on Gregory or Gris, I should say, was a lot. Gregory, I like it. He looks cool. He looks realistic in a way. Even Celestia, who has one of the most ridiculous stripperific outfits in the whole thing, coming obviously right off of being designed after Zephia, just looks better. The color palette looks way better. The blacks and golds just feel like they work. They're complementary colors more than the rainbow array of reds and blues and everything else that Zefia has going on. So I like it. I like it a lot. And I've said many times that Nil and Nell, I think, are some of the best designed characters in the game. Like, they still feel very designed, but they're way less obnoxious than a lot of the characters. Their colors work better together. They feel like they are allowed to be a bit more out there in their designs as fell dragons. Like, that just works. It just works better. I like it a lot. So again, just like with the soundtrack, I love the designs of these characters. And even having, like, the corrupted nobles and the design of the final boss and, like, the designs of the corrupted wolves are super cool and freaky. Like, there's a lot of good there in terms of art and design and just visual appeal in this DLC. That's part of the reason I like it a lot. So again, A+. In terms of the characters themselves, I really am interested to play with them. I haven't had the chance to at all yet. I'm recording this pretty much right after we had unlocked them, so I just got the chance to actually look at their base stats, how they joined. But I'm excited. It seems like they're going to be really powerful. Madeline absolutely seems fully spec'd out to be a frontline tank, frontline warrior, as one might expect. She's got very good damage, good HP, very good defense, and I'm excited to throw her out there on the front lines and see how she competes with characters like Louis or even my tank Kagetsu, and just see how it goes. I don't know if I'm going to leave her in general yet. I've got some ideas on how I want to do that. There's some ideas that my chat was tossing out to me as well. I might wind up changing her class, but she's got a great personal skill. She's got a great design. She has a lot of potential in terms of stats. Definitely want to use her. Similarly, on the opposite side of the spectrum, instead of physical attack and physical defense, we're looking at magical attack and resistance with Gregory, who also seems like an absolute unit. That man is a magic tank like no other, and it's a little bit of a shame because he's definitely going to be stealing that spot a bit from my Sage Jade. I think she'll still have value as a mixed defense frontline mage, which is how I've kind of been using her, but in terms of pure magic tanking, Gregory's where it's at. That man has resistance out the wazoo. He's awesome. Again, very good personal skill. There's a lot of options there for just frontline avoiding and stuff like that. One of my community members was talking about how they're planning on doing a Mage Knight Gregory. That sounds really cool. So he seems like he has a lot of viability for sure. And then Celestia herself, I mean, she's got a unique class. She has the same Soul Blade level 5 skill that Zefia does. Very powerful, great mixed attacking stats, good speed. She's a flyer. She's got access to magic. She's got access to swords. No class change is necessary here. She's just going to be strong. And if her performance in the Xenologue is any indicator, pairing her up with Camilla is going to be awesome. The damage output that she's going to have, the maneuverability, the ability to put down healing dragon veins, she's going to have it all going on. So definitely going to be seeing a lot of use on my team. And then Nil and Nell just as dragons, man, like, they're just, you can't argue with that. They're dragons in the way that Allier wishes that he was a dragon, or she, depending on what you chose. But, like, they've got dragon stones, they have defense and resistance, they've got really good stats, they have their unique weapons that they can utilize, like, they probably have really good growths. I haven't actually looked at their growths yet, but I imagine they've got very strong growths, so I'm very excited to use them. Depending on what their growths are, they could even be really good in other classes as well if you didn't feel like using them as dragons. And, I mean, there's an argument to be made for that. As dragons, they would have a lot of benefits on the battlefield. So they're going to be great units to use in any team, and I'm excited to see what build viability they have. Finally, I want to talk about the story, because other than the decline in gameplay quality, that's probably the thing that I'm the most disappointed with the Xenologue. The writing of the Fell Xenologue started off so good. It was such a breath of fresh air after the extremely lackluster to bad writing of the majority of Fire Emblem Engage. And as a story guy, I'm happy to see that. I like to actually have a Fire Emblem game with a at least serviceable, if not good, story, as we've had plenty of them in the past. And the Xenologue felt like a return to form in that regard. We have a darker tone. Things aren't as whimsical and silly. You could be forgiven for forgetting that there was ever a 4Kids opening in the first place. The characters are tired and battered and actually feel like they've been fighting a war. The world is torn apart. There's interesting deviations from our world compared to the world of the Xenologue. Like, what characters have done what. Allier is a divine dragon as opposed to, you know, a different type of deal is what's going on with the base game. There's so much interesting stuff going on, and the characters are very compelling. Nell and Nil are both very interesting characters who have very interesting story arcs for different reasons, and who give Allier pushback in a lot of ways, intentionally or otherwise, that the characters in the base game don't really, because everyone's so busy literally worshiping the Divine Dragon. It doesn't happen here, and that's interesting. Like, their role as the Divine Dragon is still very important, but you can see a more realistic interaction and viewpoint of Allier in the eyes of these characters that we never got to see in baseline Engage, and that's great. Characters like the Four Winds. Again, I love every single one of them. I can't stand the Four Hounds, except for Mavier. But the Winds are awesome. And, like, again, getting to spend more time with them. They're protagonists now instead of antagonists. You could say that that alone influences the way we view them, but I really think they're just better written, man. They have similar personality type things going on as the Four Hounds do, but they just feel like more thought was put into it. And that's awesome. Like, I cannot wait to see what interactions they have with the characters of the base game, with potentially their alternate universe versions of themselves in the Four Hounds. I'm at the big battle in the harbor where you encounter the Four Hounds all together, and I'm definitely going to be trying to send the Four Winds against each one of them to see what dialogue we get. Like, it's such an interesting way of going about introducing new characters by giving us these alternate versions of the villains and making them so interesting and compelling. Like, they could have done some sort of cop-out where we just got the Four Hounds because we had to team up with them, because this is the alternate world where darkness was pushing back against light, very Final Fantasy, you know, and that's kind of what I expected here. But no, they legitimately are their own characters. You could just see the threads that potentially could have had them become the Four Hounds if their lives had been different. And I love that. I absolutely love that. I loved their interactions with each other and the other characters from start to finish. I love the Corrupted Royals. Again, similar to the Hounds and the Winds, we see just what things could change with some of our new favorite characters from Engage if things were different, if things were bloodier, if they didn't have the support that they had maybe in our world, or, you know, if the Divine Dragon dies, what happens to them? If war truly engulfs the land, what happens to them? It's interesting. It's very interesting. Some characters are a more drastic change than others, but, you know, one of the standouts is Celine, a character that my chat and I talked about a lot, how she really just feels like how Celine would be in a more war-torn, bloody country. A woman who very highly views her own nobility and is very much willing to get her hands dirty to fulfill her role as a noble who takes care of her country and her people above all else, and the lengths that can be taken to. And that's super cool. I absolutely enjoyed seeing that. And I wish we had more of it, and I wish that had been more of the focus for the whole Xenologue. But unfortunately, and this is where I soured, that's where we get into the actual story with Nil and with Nell. And it really shouldn't be too surprising that they're the ultimate focus, seeing as how they're the two, you know, OC dragons, kind of counterparts to Allier and his role in the base game. And man, the writing just really fell apart around the midpoint of Chapter 5. Really the start of Chapter 5. Spoilers, of course, as this is where big reveals start happening. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That was your spoiler warning. Click away if you haven't finished the Xenologue and you care about the details of the story. Now I will say the thing. Nil's betrayal. after Nil betrays the party, it feels like everything just falls apart. Because the reasons given are so weird. Like, Nil has been evil all this time and has somehow been turning literally the entire continent into corrupted without anyone noticing and without anyone knowing that he had this level of power. And he holds this big grudge against his sister for being so strong and being the focus, even though he's also strong. But then we find out that maybe that was an influence of Sombron on him, but then maybe not, because we find out that he's actually not Nil. He's a different, completely unrelated, well, literally related, but a random sibling called Rafal, who happened to just look identical to Nil, who was best friends with Nil. And when Nil actually died during the war, Rafal took his place, but then held a grudge because Nil only ever had eyes for his sister, whereas Rafal viewed Nil as his actual brother. So it seems like that's his motivation, but then it was the power of Sombron that was really doing it, but maybe not really. And also, like, Nil/Rafal only gets the bracelets because we kick his ass at the end of Chapter 5, and it's like, okay, we're just gonna leave him here unconscious with the bracelets while we go find the Four Winds for some reason, who we think are going to die, and then Mavier warps them out using warp staves, or a warp staff that he apparently always had, that he didn't for some reason use to send the Four Winds with us. Like, if he was going to sacrifice himself anyway, he could have sent the other 3 winds to us to help us with Nil and sacrificed himself then, but then he waits to do it at a conveniently dramatic time after Madeline tries to confess her love to him, and then Nil becomes a dragon who's inexplicably more powerful than Sombron, even though they both got the power of the rings, and then we forgive him because he's going to heal Nell because she decided to stab herself because apparently she realized that that was the only way to lift the curse that Sombron had put on the Dragonstone that Nil was then wielding. And then he needs to spend 1,000 years healing her to bring her back, and which he does, but then time passes wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey in the well, so he joins us after like a couple of days with Nell, and is like, oh, it's been 1,000 years, but I'm literally the same person. No personality change happened at all, even though I was alone in this dead world with literally nothing around me. Oh, can we go back to the Royals, please? Oh my god, man, they had a good thing going. They had a good thing going with the corrupted royals and Nell and Nil as the guardians of the land. And then they just fumbled it. And it blows my mind. It's not as bad as the writing in Engage. We have no 7-minute soliloquy of Zephia revealing why she was evil, but why she's good now because she just wanted a family and all that nonsense that we got in the base game after her and Grist should have been dead 3 times over. 5 times over, really, with how many times we fought them. But it still wasn't great. And it's a shame. I'm still happy with the writing of the Royals. All the character writing was really, really good from start to finish. It was really just the main story and the corners that were written into and then out of to justify the battles that they wanted us to fight and the betrayals that they wanted there to be, while still also allowing us to have Nil as a playable character at the end of the day. It was just weird. It was just weird. Man. But yeah, so, I mean, that's all the major points of the Xenologue. I'm planning on doing a full review of Engage, including all of the DLC as a whole, so I don't want to put too fine a point on it for now. But I will say that ultimately I still enjoyed the Xenologue, despite the downhill slide of the story and the mounting frustration over difficulty of really just maddening. I've heard that hard mode is really good. I have to try it at some point. But even in spite of that, I still enjoyed this. I still think it was a very fun story DLC, additional content. And take it with all the other DLC, I think it was absolutely worth picking up. So, yeah, I've rambled on long enough here, so I'm going to wrap this one up. Let me know your thoughts on the Xenologue in terms of its gameplay and its story and the characters, both in terms of their writing and their designs and the actual gameplay viability. The classes as well. I haven't had a chance to play around with Mage, Cannoneer, and Enchantress, but they seem really strong, so I can't wait to play with that. And if you have any interesting builds or thoughts or anything like that, drop it in the comments, start up a conversation with me, with other community members. That'd be great. Until the next video and stream, though, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Again, please, if you've made it this far, do me a favor, drop a like on the video. It'll help me out a lot. Hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.